Kurt Gardner. I'm Senior Engineering Manager of Data Engineering and ML Engineering at NIB, mainly because the title sounded cool, but maybe a little long. I've been there for 10 years. I've got a very technical background, so hopefully I don't bore you through the slides. Started as a software engineer, went through DevOps, started into cloud, did a bit of architecture. It was largely both curiosity-driven and hate-driven development. I kept bouncing off things that were adjacent to my role and kept arguing with people until eventually they said, well, you do it. I'll go through roughly what our data journey's been. It's quite rapid in recent times. There's been a lot of change in this space in IT in general, which I find quite fascinating and interesting. Both where we came from, where we're going, how Immuta fits into this piece, and what we're hoping to do in the future, how that forms a part. I've left Q&A at the end, but that's really just in case I finish too early because I've drunk too much coffee. Nib Group. If you haven't heard from it in the current market, that's probably a good thing. But we're private health insurance. We also do travel insurance. We cover about 1.7 million people across Australia and New Zealand. We do a number of travel insurance brands. We have white labels. So if you're covered, you may be covered by us. I think the most interesting thing here is our strategy is very data-driven, and I suspect nearly everyone here has a very similar idea. Data is the future, it's the new oil. For us, we want to help people live healthier lives, and that's by understanding more about who they are, more about how we can help them target their specific stage in life, their specific health needs. If you're healthier, you're claiming less. That's a win for you. If you're claiming less, we're making more money and we can lower the premiums. Everybody wins. But that assumes you trust us. This is the then stack. So like I said, we've got a range of different brands, different businesses. We've come together through a number of acquisitions. You've probably seen a lot of these icons, probably have a lot of them floating around at your own organization. There's quite a lot of SQL Server, kind of does the job. There's a number of weird databases like IBM Infomix that most of the ETL vendors don't want to work with. Universe, Basic. I'm sure we can find a job if you're a specialist. This also adheres to the previous security model, which was the hard, crunchy shell and the soft, gooey inner. So these are the sorts of things that we're trying to improve on as we move forward. It was also very fragile. We find a lot of things are very chained. They're very one-shot. It needs to happen at 7 a.m. every day because the CEO gets his email and his report, or the CFO gets their data sciencey things at 7 a.m. And if they don't get it at that point, the data's moved on and the numbers won't line up to what they're expecting. It's resource constrained. It's on-prem. How many people have had to ask the IT operations team for just a little bit more disk or a little bit more RAM? It's tedious. And the other part is because it's such a broad stack, trying to hire people and say, oh, we just need you to know all of these things and be really good at it, starts to get a bit hard. This is the shiny stack that I think was threatened earlier. This is all the cool new tools that we're trying to adopt, or we are adopting. I'll try not to labor it because most people have probably seen it, but the key call outs for me is the app space, the source, is moving to a lot more modular architecture. We're starting to see microservices and SaaS products like Salesforce. We're seeing integrations from external devices, be they Fitbits, Garmin's, Apple Watches. The Fivetran's the obvious thing for moving data around, so it's our go-to. But the other interesting part in this space, and I will mention data mesh later on, is that we're starting to see more and more streaming data. So Fivetran's great for that, getting data out of the old systems, but we're also looking at Kinesis, Event Bridge, all those sorts of things. SFTP, because some people just, that's what they know. Snowflake, S3, great, cheap, they just work. DBT, we're pushing everyone into this ELT paradigm. We've got a lot of our analysts, we've created new analytics engineers like many companies, we've got data engineers. And actually touching back on the last one, the thing I love about separating ETL and moving to ELT is extract and load. It's very much a commodity service. This is something where we can start talking about, okay, what's the cheapest tool that will do this job for us? What's one that's just going to work, stay out of the road, have a low total cost of ownership? And for us, Fivetran's been great for that. Looking at other things in the future. Now we've got DBT, which is a very specialized tool. We can start looking at how that integrates to tools like Immuta. I tried to figure out how to make Immuta bigger because I thought it might get me an extra drink later on, but I figured the key point there is to at least call to it. So as we move away from that hard outer shell to the soft, crunchy inside, we've adopted things like Okta for single sign-on, so we've got MFA everywhere, which hopefully is going to make sure you haven't heard of this for a lot longer, and Immuta on the inside for who can access what. So that's the whole, who are you, and should you be looking at this? On the right, actually, on the right and the left, I probably could have just stamped Excel everywhere. The other recognition is Excel, most of the world runs on it. If we ignore it, it's going to get used anyway, right? So why not lean into it, adopt it, make sure we're enabling it, and that way we can actually start talking about, okay, what data you're actually looking at? What are you interested in? What's the quality of it? What's the trustworthiness of it? How do we secure it? And then the other part is Snowflake on the output side is we're doing secure data sharing with external organizations. So part of that helping people live healthier lives, we recognize that we're not the greatest at managing your health programs, but there's a lot of specialist companies that are. So this allows us to securely, with the identified data, talk to external organizations. A quick overly technical slide. So what you see on the top is basically what Martin Fowler coined a strangler fig pattern. So the idea is the strangler fig, you lay the seed in the branches and it just grows down. Eventually your old tree gets replaced with a whole new tree and the old tree disappears. That's what we're trying to do with all these old systems. So the top path is that quick, how do we get the calculations that are done in SAS or DataStage or Talend or SSIS or any of those old tools that are a bit hard to automate, they're a bit hard to govern, or just too diverse and too hard to hire from. We put that into Snowflake, and that way we can start looking at how we govern it with things like Immuta. We can look at the process with tools like dbt, where we can start building our transforms. We can scale with cloud. So we've had calculations that used to take days come down to a couple of minutes and have these beautiful SQL statements. And then over time, as we learn more and more of the raw data, the bottom path is the one that takes precedent, and we'll slowly pull the top path away. And for those that have done this sort of thing in the audience, you'll realize that this is a very long tail, but the other alternative is generally the waterfall project, which is 2 years, millions of dollars. So it's kind of a take a pick. Data meth, it's that addictive. Data mess is the other one. And I love this because, like I said, I came from software engineering and DevOps, and microservices was this great solve all your problems and create new ones kind of vibe. I think data mesh is exactly the same way. You need to be comfortable with automation. You need to have tools like Immuta in place, like Okta. You need to have a culture of automation and understanding how all the bits hold together and how you're going to govern that. But it's also exciting because we're starting to move away from this, I'm a data warehouse engineer, I build data warehouses, to I understand data because I build a system, and we've thought about what is a customer. We've got attributes. We have all these things defined. The existing approach I've heard called non-consensual APIs, which I thought was a fantastic way to talk about we're reaching into your app and we're just stealing the data in exactly that format, and we're going to whinge at you when you change things. And talking to that slide with all the tools, everyone talks about the tools we use, but a lot of the tools, there's this assumption that you just drop it in and magic happens. But the reality is, and the exciting part is, it only happens when you start looking at your processes, at your people, at your ways of building these things. And like I said, I've got that nerdy DevOps software engineering background, but I think continuous delivery and lean agile practices inside the data space is some of the most exciting pieces, and how we can build in the data security, governance, metadata, et cetera, is the bit that I've really been enjoying in the last couple of years and what we're really focusing on, plus that move towards more and more streaming data. Press the button again. Oh, here we go, back. So role-based access control, if you've read any of the Immuta doco or know much in this space, that's the typical approach. That's where we come from in Snowflake. So we've built our own in-house automation with undocumented features, which means that when it hits a certain number of rules, just falls over. We've reached out for support, and it's like, hey, can you recreate this? And it's like, well, no, we just had to fix it because we're holding people up, and you recreate it. So basically, we've had this technical challenge that we've been looking at. Okay, what's the next step? How do we move away from these magical in-house solutions? The sinking ship imagery is the thing that always comes to mind for me. I see RBAC very much like I see firewalls, which I understand might have been a telecoms challenge recently when they lost a little bit of data. But they're very much like, you've got this boat and someone needs to run a new wire. So you just drill a little hole in the side and you run the wire. That's fine, the boat still floats. But then someone else has a request and you poke another hole for a new application, or you add a new data set for that role. And over time, you've done this a few times. Your friend's done this. The previous generation of sysadmins or data engineers or governance people have done this. And eventually what you've got is a boat that looks great on land, but as soon as you push it out in the water, looks a little bit like the picture on the left. And we've seen this the whole time. It's really hard because you'll have someone in, say, the data warehouse team, and everyone needs access to everything in there. Same deal with the analytics. You'll have one person in a team of 10 that just says, oh, can you just give me access to that really sensitive data set? Well, it's a valid business concern, so it adheres to all the government's requirements, governance, but all of a sudden 10 people have access to this because it's just such a blunt object. The other part, so attribute-based access control or policy-based access control. The exciting part for this is being able to talk to our cybersecurity, our governance people, and have a system that resembles the regulations. I think I forgot to mention we're APRA regulated, so we come under all the CPS, CPGs that the big banks do. We've got GDPR because we operate travel insurance around the world, so right to forget, things like that. There's ASIC because we're a publicly listed company. So there's a lot of people very interested in how we look after our data, not to mention our customers. So the beauty now is we can take a lot of these policies, we can turn them into categories. We can align these categories to the data products, and then we can use that to pull back to the policies. So we can start building a system in a way that no longer is nonsensical to the people that are interested in how we're governing it. We can have this more common language when we're discussing both what we're building and how we're securing it and why it's probably okay, and hopefully we're still not in the news. The other part I'm kind of excited about, but we haven't quite done yet, is that time-limited access. So part of the leaky boat is drilling the holes. Time-limited access is essentially plugging the hole once you're done. A lot of things are project-driven. Hey, I'm just building this report for a particular exec. I need it for about 3 weeks. That's great. Let's put you in this group. Let's get your peers in there so you're not having this, can you see this data? I'm just getting this nothing. You get a lot more coherent project experience. You get a lot more secure systems over time because it's probably a bit ship of Theseus for anyone that knows theology, that over time it's a whole new boat, but it still looks the same, and that's all that matters. Here's the nerd out slide. So another one, like I said, DBT is a really key piece in how we're building these data products. So we've got a lot of analytics engineers, analysts, even actuarials are starting to get into here, the ML engineers, the data scientists. The beauty of DBT is SQL is a language that pretty much everyone can understand, and I'm told the S isn't for simple. I've forgotten what it does stand for though. But using that as central, using the metadata and the manifest that's generated means that as you build this product, do you understand what the sensitivity of it is? Do you know what the categories are? Generally, people will. When it says customer, you probably know what that means, or name, or date of birth. At this point, it's a fantastic opportunity to start putting those tags in. And the beauty is it builds into the workflow. This is the process by which you expose this data as a new data set. This should also be the point in time where you say, who should have access to this? Or rather, what is the classification of this? And that speaks a little to the slide earlier, I think, that was saying, we don't care about the policies. As data engineers, I don't want to read the Privacy Act. Oh my God. Maybe if I want to go to sleep and I'm really struggling. But I do want to know that the data is well secured. And I'm happy to say, look, date of birth, yeah, that's probably personally identifiable information. I understand what this data product is. I know how it translates to the real world. And I can tag this at this point. Those things will then flow through to Immuta. Beauty of that is you've now got your data surfaced in the Immuta tool. So when we run reports, we can send them to cybersecurity team, the legal risk and governance, And we can have a discussion about, hey, look, here's the customer data set that we've been building for the analyst. Here's how it's tagged. The governance people in the team can be less technical and just work through the interface and say, oh, I can see how that adheres to this policy that's labeled the Australian Privacy Act. Metadata is something that we're literally just using DBT docs for at the moment. It kind of works. It's getting a little bit messy, so we're looking at what we can do, but the intent is very much to build it into that same automated workflow. And build kite's the thing we're using down the bottom, that funny little green logo that you may have missed earlier. Bit of an example. I think I'm ahead of time. It's disappointing. Bit of an example. So claims. We have a lot of claims data. And some of the internal discussions, actually, to take a step back, the difference between a credit card and your health history is you can get a new credit card. If you've had an anxiety disorder, mental health issues, or something that you just don't want, something that you probably needed antibiotics for that you don't want people generally knowing about, you can't take that back. You almost need a new identity. You need to move countries. And I think in some ways that makes the private health insurance information that we keep far more sensitive than a lot of the PCI data, despite the fact that with PCI DSS, it's far more regulated and much more restrictive. So we've been working on Immuta probably the last 12 months. We've probably been a bit slower than I'd like to admit, but really keen to be on the front foot with this to, like I said, keep ourselves out of the news, but also keep the data safe and make sure people are still able to do their jobs, but be comfortable knowing what good looks like. So if you've got claims data, the other piece is moving from RBAC. It was always at a full data table, data view. You were starting to build views that were redacting certain columns. You had to build views that were masking certain columns. Here you can leave most of it in place and use the policies to start masking the data. It simplifies managing the data sets that you're building up. It means we don't have to proliferate our DBT projects, our models quite so much. And it means it can be a lot more flexible over time. So here we've got Shannon, nicely gender neutral name. We've got a number of tags and attributes that we're starting to put on people through Okta and other tools. So we can see Shannon's in finance, works for the Australian Residents Health Insurance, which is just nerd speak, internal speak for Australian health insurance. Clearance PCI means that this person has approval. Hopefully they've done some kind of training through our internal compliance tools. Domains finance, we're still working through, if I'm honest, whether the domains should be derivable from the job function and department, but sometimes it's good to be specific and it gives us more levers to pull in terms of there's people in the organization that have data sets and they're a lot more opinionated about who, and that's great because they're willing to put the effort in to make sure that only the people they trust can have access, but not everybody's signing up for quite that level of granularity. And function, accounts payable clerk. So a lot of these things come through from our Workday HR system, which is beautiful. It means the attributes don't have to be manually created. It means that they're generally pretty well up to date because the HR team care about this stuff because that's how people get paid. So it's a pretty good data set. And now, as I mentioned, through DBT, we've tagged these fields. So this will often happen via the analytics engineer or similar in discussion with the people that they're building it for or the source systems. And then the policies will automatically pick up. So for this person, we can see that they've got PCI clearance, but they don't have clearance for the private health information. So that cross through the eye means they won't be able to see the medical condition. It'll be masked data in the table. And I should have made these slides a bit more distinctive. Oh, here we go, that one. And the beauty there is not just row level access, not just column level access, but you can actually do a combination of both. So we've got businesses in New Zealand and we've got analysts that'll need both, but some of the analysts only need one sub-business. And as we start to move to these microservices systems, we've got a single claim system that's going to be the master of all, but a lot of the downstream users only need a subset of that data. So with appropriate policies and attributes, we can see that this person is part of the Australian Residents Health Insurance. So they'll be able to see the medical conditions for all of the Australian residents, but they won't be seeing the people for New Zealand. So as I was saying, time-limited access. I should have had another slide where it was cut off, but as soon as the project's over, we close that out and they lose access to the, which data? The Australian Residents Health Insurance data. and it goes back to normal. So the beauty is we've plugged the hole once we're done. And then there's the future. Where do we go? So improving how we do discovery and metadata integration. Discovery is an interesting one, and I'd love thoughts, what other people are doing. How many times do people ask, where is that claims data set again? I think more important is being able to surface quality. Is this data set trustworthy? Who owns it? Who do I talk to about changing it? The schema of how do I use this? How do I interface with it? And the metadata of what does customer actually mean in this context? Because a lot of data is socio-political, and if APRA asks us for a count of customers, it might be different to if marketing say, I'm going to do a great presentation and explain how fantastic we are. So just round up to, was it 12,000? Thanks. Data traceability, that's an interesting one in the sense of the way we do APIs and things like that. It's more about contracts. It's more about recognizing that there's handoffs. There's this sense that we tend to reach for change approval boards and slowing things down. As soon as something breaks, it's like, oh, you need to tell me before you change that thing next time. It's like, no, I think you just need to be more mindful that you have downstream consumers, that certain changes are fine and other changes maybe need to be handled in a subtly different way. So contracts are probably just as important as traceability. Data products shifted left, so I touched on data mesh. The beauty of this is I think as software development gets better and better tools, so things like Lambda remove a lot of the heavy lifting of worrying about patch sets. So, oh my goodness, are we running the latest version of OpenSSL? Who knows, who cares? Amazon will do that for you, or Azure or Google, just ask them. And as they do this, I'm optimistic that we can start talking to the application developers. You've already thought about your application. What is a customer? What are its attributes? How does this happen? Why do we then have to recreate that at the other end? Why are we re-snapshotting? We already captured this data, just emit it in a format that can be then reused to replay events over time, understand where things were, but also don't recreate the metadata piece. Data streaming, same piece. It's starting to reduce the latency. It's starting to build in anti-fragile. It's starting to build in things about automatic recovery. A lot of the batch processes were challenging because if they broke, you were scrambling. There were so many different batch pieces that relied on each other. And as soon as one fell over, the whole thing just, you spend days recovering a lot of this stuff. And observability, I think, is kind of traceability, so I'll probably put that there twice. There we go. Questions, jokes?
No, if you're happy to take questions.
I'm happy to take questions, or we can do that over drinks later. You've got.
I think they want to drink. Okay,
yeah.
all right.
I'm down with that.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you. Big round of applause.